How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart is a memoir of sorts by Malaysian writer Florentyna Leow. Florentyna was born in Malaysia, lived and studied in London, and has since moved between Tokyo and Kyoto. And this is a kind of memoir collection about her life in Kyoto and what that city did for her and to her. It's short at about 140 pages, and it's really moving, beautifully, poetically written, taking notice of tiny little things that you wouldn't really expect someone to notice and dwell on in the way that she does, and that's something that I found really charming about this book. How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart is an interesting thing to try to define, because it's a lot of different things. It's kind of a memoir, in the sense that it's about her life and her experiences, but because it's kind of structured like an essay collection, you could also call it that. Each chapter or section is relatively self-contained, but also feeds into a longer narrative, as all of our lives do. And what struck me as really interesting is, at the very beginning, the first thing that Florentyna focuses on is a failed friendship that she had when she first arrived. When she moved from Tokyo to Kyoto, she was trying to get out of a really dreadful corporate job. And a friend offered her the chance to live together and work together. And they did so for about 18 months until this friend suddenly left Japan entirely, and they never spoke again. And Florentyna tried to maintain a connection with this person, but they just ignored her. And she's heartbroken. She's absolutely heartbroken by the loss of a friend. And you can tell that this loss of friendship drives a lot of what she's writing here. She feels let down and upset, maybe even betrayed, and certainly confused. And when we get to the very end, she circles back to that friendship and just notes at the very end that she didn't know how that friend liked her eggs. And Florentyna believes that knowing how someone likes their eggs is a mark of a good relationship between the two of you. If you know how a family member, a friend, or a romantic partner likes their eggs, you really know them. And I find that really endearing and charming. But between the heartbreak of losing a friend that she thought she had, and talking about eggs, there's an entire book about this city and what it has done to her and for her. For a lot of her time in Kyoto, and this book covers about 2 years, she worked as a tour guide. And so she talks about what that job was like and the fact that mostly she enjoyed it. But being a tour guide really kind of tears down the veil of what tourist hotspots are like. She jokes about how no one should have to go to the Temple of the Golden Pavilion more than once. And I've been there. I don't want to go again. Because it's just a big shiny building that tourists crowd around like flies around a light. It's awful. And she makes a lot of funny, tongue-in-cheek, and sometimes just genuinely angry comments about tourist hotspots. There's a moment, I think towards the end, where she talks about just how many tourists versus locals there are in the city of Kyoto. It's not that populated, and it's pretty small. You can walk around it. But the sheer number of tourists is quite dizzying. Outside of being a tour guide, she also talks about this wonderful local kisaten, or coffee shop. But kisaten are very specific types of coffee shop, very traditional, and you know them when you see them, so she does her best to kind of describe them, and it's really charming the way that she gets to know the people who run it, and she starts to feel like a local, and that kind of thing almost brings a tear to your eye, the way that she feels part of the furniture. And that's really comforting. And then there are more starkly difficult moments to sort of digest, and they hit you pretty hard, like when she talks about race. The fact that as a Malaysian Chinese person, she kind of passes for Japanese, and that leaves her in this kind of limbo state as a foreigner in Japan. She talks about the image of the foreigner in Japan being a kind of 20 or 30 something white guy from the UK or the US. And that's what we picture when we think of a gaijin or a foreigner. We picture a 20-something white guy. And when you're not that, and ethnically you kind of look Japanese, it creates this weird sense of displacement in her, I guess. And I think that that's a really valuable thing for her to dwell on and try to communicate to us. Especially me, a white person who has lived in Japan and fits that bill of gaijin. It's a really interesting point, and I dwelled on it for a moment, just thinking about Japan's general attitude towards ethnicity, culture, and where you're from the perspective of a Malaysian-born woman. It's really enlightening. And thinking about it now, there's so much variety and depth to this book, because these moments where she talks about race hit you so hard, but there are also such charming moments when it comes to talking about eggs and talking about the dreadful tourist hotspots of Japan's old capital. And everything is written so beautifully. It's all gorgeous. She has a really beautiful way with words. There's a sort of playful poeticism to a lot of it. I find her language has a sense of color to it. There's a brightness. And as I read the book, I felt the lights change around me. It felt as though she had control over the tone and the color of the mood. It's a really difficult thing to try to express, but in the sadder moments where she's talking about, I don't think she ever uses the word racism, but certainly racial and ethnic difficulties, there's a sort of cloudiness to it. The words become heavier. And then when she's talking about eggs and talking about her local coffee shop, you feel a burst of color. You feel as though you're reading flowers. I found that so charming. I think the tone, which is balanced between playfulness and seriousness, it does so much heavy lifting when it comes to the impact of this book. I think that How Kyoto Breaks Your Heart is a wonderful example of the importance of execution, how half of the emotional impact of anything you read is the content, and the other half is how it's expressed, the execution of it. Obviously, poetry is a standard example of that effect, but it's nice to see that in a kind of memoir/essay collection. It's a lovely thing that you don't really expect. Her writing is charming, it's playful, it's colourful. It sometimes feels like heavy clouds and other times feels like fireworks, and I think that's stunning. This is also a book that really made me miss Kyoto. I've only been a few times, and I can't wait to go again. It highlights what a city does to us as people. It makes us think about how our homes and the places that we make into our homes change and shape us, and how our relationship to a place will always be different to someone else's, and so she's just relaying hers. I find that very, very valuable. This is a book full of really charming, lovely anecdotes, and I commend her for wearing her heart on her sleeve when talking about difficult things like race, lost friendships, difficult jobs, feeling untethered. These are difficult things to talk about, and she just does it. And that is valuable. That is something that the reader can treasure. And I'm really grateful to her for that. This is a lovely little collection of anecdotes and personal stories. So check it out. In the UK, it's published by the Emma Press, who are absolutely wonderful people. This is a real charmer. Check it out and subscribe for books.